I was 11 years old having a rare moment, sitting quietly midday alone in the family room with the TV. In a large family, these moments were rare. No brothers around, Dad surely at work, and no clue where my mom was. I didn't track my mom since the majority of my conflict arose from my brothers. It was the era of only a handful of channels to watch during soap opera hour, of which held no interest to me, which left me with the public broadcasting system and the Nova programs and Carl Sagan. Messages from home were rarer than moments of midday solitude with the TV, although during this era, messages from home were not marked as messages from home because I thought I was home. In my home during midday solitude with the TV, it was many decades later, through the magical intersection of synchronicity, reflection, and hindsight, that I recognized these messages were from home. Recognition because messages from home blew my Flatland mind.
Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean, absolutely flat. And that we live, appropriately enough, in a flatland. We have squares, circles, triangles, and we all scurry about, and we can go into our houses and do our flat business. Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. That being the case, we know, us flatlanders, about left-right, and we know about forward-back, but we have never heard of up-down. Let us imagine that into Flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. Hello, says the three-dimensional creature. How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension. Well, the poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter Flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in Flatland only partially. Only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So when the three-dimensional creature first reaches Flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen, and we'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pad and placing that image in Flatland. And as the apple were to descend through, slither by Flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices, which we can represent by cutting the apple. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion could be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above Flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in Flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing Flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before, to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, for heaven's sake, what's happened to you? And the poor square has to say, well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up. And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, well, show us, where is that third dimension? Point to it. And the poor square will be unable to comply. But maybe more interesting is the other direction in dimensionality. What about the fourth dimension? Now, to approach that, let's consider a cube. We can imagine a cube in the following way. You take a line segment and move it at right angles to itself in equal length. That makes a square. Move that square in equal length at right angles to itself, and you have a cube. Now, this cube, we understand, casts a shadow. And that shadow we recognize. It's, ordinarily drawn in third grade classrooms as two squares with their vertices connected. Now, if we look at the shadow of a three-dimensional object in 2 dimensions, we see that, in this case, not all the lines appear equal. Not all the angles are right angles. The three-dimensional object has not been perfectly represented in its projection in 2 dimensions, but that's part of the cost of losing a dimension in the projection. Now, let's take this three-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a fourth physical dimension. Not that way, not that way, not that way, but at right angles to those 3 directions. I can't show you what direction that is, but imagine that there is a fourth physical dimension. In that case, we would generate a 4-dimensional hypercube, which is also called a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract because I and you are trapped in 3 dimensions. But what I can show you is the shadow in 3 dimensions of a 4-dimensional hypercube or tesseract. This is it. And you can see it's 2 nested cubes, all the vertices connected by lines. And now the real tesseract in 4 dimensions would have all the lines of equal length and all the angles right angles. That's not what we see here, but that's the penalty of projection.
And then I slipped back into Flatland, landing softly in my walls, never sharing with anyone this experience. Because at 11, immersed in Flatland was hard enough. Because at 11 in Flatland, my authority was predicated on being an obedient child. Because at 11, I wasn't passing that test well. My best defense in Flatland was to be quiet and keep things to myself. A defense that didn't often yield the best results, since I was often accused of pouting so much a bird could land on my lip. In the second video methods, I introduced a purpose for reducing life to an XY plane, and the great material value that has arisen from reducing, especially in Western cultures, especially in the United States, of reducing context. Increasing context increases complexity, which is why confounding variables are factored out of the gold standard of research, empirically based studies. It also is the foundation that constructs meaning and experiences. Take, for example, Neil deGrasse Tyson's meaning of crystals.
So imagine someone comes up to you with some crystals, and they tell you that there's sort of a crystal energy embedded within them. And if you rub them together, this energy field will release, and it will enter your body and cure you of your ailments. All right, I have several things to say about that. 1, it is equally as intellectually lazy for you to say, great, give them to me. How much? Here's my money. I'll use them tonight. As it is to say, this can't possibly be true. Get out of here. You're a charlatan. Both of those are equally intellectually lazy. If you're just taking what the person says, giving them money, that person could be exploiting your ignorance of the natural world and how it works. If you are rejecting what the person says, you didn't give yourself a chance to probe whether or not what the person said could be true. So what you need to do at this point is start asking questions. Where are these crystals from? What are they made of? What frequency of energy is generated when you rub them? On what ailments has this been tested? Can you show me those test results? Tell me about them so I can look them up. Let's look them up together. Was that research result verified by others? Is there a kind of disease that it does cure better than another disease that it maybe doesn't? You start asking questions. If only one experiment found that result, or two, or even only three, it's susceptible because you could have been biased. You could have done an experiment that didn't really test what you were looking for, but masqueraded as though it was.
He demonstrates a low-context XY plane of his worldview. The word explain is derived from Latin explanar, make level, flatten out, from ex, out, and planos, flat. It's helpful to know the location of information as it is nested within context. I was explained to my brother Kip and was blown away by what happened.
Well, none of that recorded for son of a bitch. That is funny. I don't even know what I said. Jesus. All right, well, let me go back and listen to the last one that did record. Okay, I can't even tell you how funny this is because I was explaining explaining, and as I was explaining, the audio of 11 minutes is flat. It's completely empty. So if you visually look at that audio, that's 11 minutes and 52 seconds. For 11 minutes and 52 seconds, it's completely flat. I can't explain logically why. I was already driving. There's no reason, it would be one thing if I was going from one medium to another, like my headphones to the car. I was already in the car driving, and somehow it didn't capture it.
I couldn't believe my 11-minute and 52-second audio explained flattened out. I had no explanation for why the single audio nested within the four others did not record and therefore was a flat line. Then I remembered my dash cam. This would have captured my explaining the explain, but then I wondered, was it possible there were visuals captured by the dash cam I missed because I was busy explaining the explain?
And so as far as our work together, it's just emerging organically. And I think that definitely what I want to show is that we all have a tendency to look at things compartmentally. Let's come out. I just remember saying, I don't think that's true. That doesn't feel right. That's what I'm trying to do. So then I'm before I just reject this notion, let me actually dive in a little bit. So I looked up the etymology of explain, and it literally means to flatten out. I'm oh, well, that's true. Pragmatic of what are the constraints that you're working within for your comfort. To add to that, which I hope this is recording, none of that recorded for son of a bitch. That is funny. I don't even know what I said. Jesus. Alright, well.
He is moving, okay. I'm looking a little more, but he wasn't moving his vehicle. He may not have known I was moving.
the Z-plane, the X-plane, the lights, all visible and all missed, because it's easy to miss the Z-plane. It's also just as easy to dismiss the Z-plane. As my brother and I were riffing on the X-plane experience, he shared with me how it presented in his world through jazz.
Mainstream jazz. Mainstream jazz is an outdated term used by journalists in the 50s to describe any type of jazz that could appeal to a general audience. This usually referred to swing outfits. Musicians such as Duke Ellington and Coleman Hawkins were frequently described as mainstream jazz.
The X-plane is commonly referred to as mainstream in Western cultures. It's a place for common ground. And as we were continuing our jazz riffing, the Z-plane made its appearance.
So I'm completely blown away that the YouTube algorithm put up, when I was watching a jazz video, put on the side a video about blowjobs, a video about this, it's tentatively about Trump, but it's actually a much deeper thing about cultural change. Put up a video about sleep apnea on the little sidebar. Things that seemingly have nothing to do with him, but have everything to do with me. So I'm definitely leaving a huge footprint.
I was confused what blowjobs had to do with Donald Trump that had to do with elite, rigid society. So naturally, I was curious to jump down that rabbit hole.
Culture change is about a shifting of the heart. It's about providing new answers to the question, how should I live my life? It's about soulcraft, and it isn't done the way you do political change. Culture change works differently. It's done, as Walter Batchett put it, if you want to win people over, enjoy the things that conservatives enjoy. Culture changes when a creative minority find a beautiful way to live. Culture changes when a small group of people find a better way to live and the rest of us copy.
Soulcraft? When a creative minority finds a beautiful way to live? These are some interesting glimmers from the self-proclaimed member of the educated elite.
So I have a confession to make. I'm a member of the educated elite. My parents were historians of Victorian England. Our turtles, when I was growing up, were named Disraeli and Gladstone. The culture in our home was think Yiddish, act British. Very stiff upper lip, we showed no emotion. And then when I was 7, I read a book called Paddington the Bear and decided I want to become a writer. And that was central to my identity ever since. In high school, which you call like fourth form or something like that, I wanted to date a woman named Bernice, and she didn't want to date me. She dated some other guy. And I remember thinking, what is she thinking? I write way better than that guy. And so those were my values. And then when I was 18, the admissions officers at Columbia, Wesleyan, and Brown universities decided I should go to the University of Chicago. And some of you may know the saying about Chicago, it's where fun goes to die. My favorite saying about Chicago, it's a Baptist school where atheist professors teach Jewish students St. Thomas Aquinas. And so it's very educated elite. And I fit right in. I had a double major at Chicago in history and celibacy while I was there. And then after school, I got a job where an educated elite person should get a job. I was hired to be the conservative columnist of the New York Times.
I was delighted my brother found a portal to provide him an insight into his mind. But the brilliance didn't end there, because he saw the X-plane, a hallmark of the first stanza, by the marketing tactic used to grab his attention.
So as I think about this video, I was really blown away by it. But then I looked at the title of it on YouTube, which is How the Elite Ripped Off Society and Brought It into Decline, or How the Elite Rigged Society and Why It's Falling Apart. Complete first stanza headline, and if you actually listen to what he says in the whole thing, it's complete second stanza. Not quite third, but it's definitely second, or going into third. So yeah, we just have to be careful about this thing of showing up or making ourselves more visible, because the way you make yourself more visible is those kinds of headlines.
How to get eyeballs. like Carl Sagan did when I was 11, or home using Carl Sagan to deliver the message. Through Nova, a star that suddenly increases its light output tremendously and then fades away into its former obscurity. Like a flicker from the galaxy, Morse code from home. Another glimmer came with Viktor Frankl in the book Maps of the Mind. Frankel's map demonstrates the shadows cast by dimensional shapes onto the X-plane all appear to be circles. It's not until adding the Z-plane we become aware of the differences. A synchronicity spanning decades jarred my 11-year-old awake, reviving the memory. Only now I had more context and more agency. The value of moving to dimensional thinking, increasing context, is conveyed by the 6 wise men, all blind, who came across an elephant. 6 wise men of India an elephant did find, and carefully they felt its shape, for all of them were blind. The first he felt towards the tusk, it does to me appear, the marvel of an elephant is very like a spear. The second sensed the creature's side, extended flat and tall. Ah, he cried, and did conclude, this animal's a wall. The third had reached towards a leg, and said, it's clear to me, what we should have instead, this creature's like a tree. The fourth had come upon the trunk, which he did seize and shake. Quoth he, this so-called elephant is really like a snake. The fifth he felt the creature's ear, and fingers over it ran. I have the answer, never fear, this creature's like a fan. The sixth had come upon the tail, as blindly he did grope. Let my conviction now prevail, this creature's like a rope. And so these men of missing sight each argued loud and long, though each was partly in the right, they were all in the wrong. When we recognize our location, conflict can turn into collaboration. Our words can become location clues.
So one of the things that he is explaining,
these words indicate the location of the perspective, the X-plane, a place to find common ground. Translating from one dimension to another can be like playing the game of charades.
Is you sitting down at a table and coming up with that moment again, so that that moment is brought to the forefront in a controlled area to say, hey, we're going to deal with your traumas here, and to have a specific spot for him to say, what is it that you're not liking? And maybe if it's the car, say, okay, we're having issues with the car. Let's deal with it here. Let's deal with it now. Let's deal with it in this space, so that we can go back to the car and think of this as a good space. So saying, let everything go in this moment. And then he's showing me, like, this is so cute. It's just like a cardboard box. And it looks like a little Valentine's Day box that we used to have as kids, where you can kind of put your cards in. But he's saying that he just needs a place for it to go. So if you have a box and you allow him and just say, hold the box, and tell him to put it in there and slip all of his problems in there.
Slip all the problems in there. Here is a great example of show versus tell, or demonstration versus explanation. Aiden described a Valentine box. He was showing love in a box. Just the slightest shift of perspective, removing plain layers, can make a meaningful difference. The explanation turned love into trauma, the loss of translation from one dimension to another. We all have shadows. Because these are evidence we are dimensional. But in a low-context, flatland world, if addressed at all, they become glossed over and refined into the hierarchy of exclusion. They create distortions in perspectives, striving to contain the self within the frame that shaped it. I did not understand this at 11. I did not understand at 11 why I pouted so much. I did not understand at 11 my perspective of myself was constructed into me, flattening out who I am in order to fit in. There were clues around, messages from home. I just needed to lift my head up and see.
I come up and you've got your back to me, but you're really close and you're mumbling to yourself, and there's a backdrop or a front drop, right? There's a picture. You can see you're in a setting, and what I see are 2 mountain peaks, but it's funny because the coloring is more like it's a picture, because there's almost like purples, the muddy purples, I want to say. And I see it and I'm like, wow, that's a new picture for Kim. And then you do this. It's kind of like what we play with screens. Okay, so then you do this and then the whole thing shifts. But you know it's like big, like if you stood outside. You're doing no. And then I come up to you and I'm like, so Kim, what are you doing? And you're like, I'll know it when I see it. And I said, okay. And then I said, well, what about that picture with the mountain? Like, what about that? And then you kind of come back and then they erupt. And you're like, yeah, but no. And then, so you're going this way, and then you're going that way, and you're saying, oh God, I mean, I'll know when I see, that's kind of, and you're kind of like, oh, you're talking to yourself, and I'm curious about all these different scenarios, really, settings. I said, so you're not finding it, and are you? And you're like, because there's just unlimited. And I said, you can go up and down, too. You can scroll up. I just, where did I get that? Who the fuck knows where? You, obviously. And you were like, what? And I was like, you can scroll up and down. And you were like, oh my God. So then you do this. There's just these endless, more and more and more.
In Love's playlist, in the story Make It Easy on You, I shared an experience I had when I participated in an authentic movement group and I was flattened out. These experiences are socially acceptable because their intent is to create common ground and protect it, and demonstrates why I am reluctant to participate in groups. I tend to slip out of the bounds of these flatland constructs. As I was fleshing out Love's playlist, I grappled with these planes. How much explaining did I do? Would it interfere by reducing the narrative? I wrote my teacher. There was a piece you shared with us week 5 in the winter 2023 session by Sharma Shields called Avenue. It was both what she wrote and what she had to say about what she wrote. I think of this as the front stage, the piece itself, and the behind the scenes, her analysis of what she was thinking, etc. But maybe there are actual terms for what I'm talking about. To which he responded, your book illustrates a way of living that is sometimes explained, but more often suggested, implied. I think this book, as it is now content-wise, could be considered a kind of satellite book of practical example and experience to a different and perhaps considered primary text. Speaking to the pieces I identify as working more subtly, I thought you might also consider this project so far as something growing into a book similar to Braiding Sweetgrass, where we get not only the experience as we do here, but we get more expletive unveiling what is happening behind the scenes, like showing the outright connection between life choice and life experience. Like this is the practice path of how you can create your own reality. How you can create your own reality. I really liked that was his experience of the book. It felt like he was conveying accessibility with minimal reduction. Translating from one dimension to another is a tricky business. Obviously it can be done, but it is also possible things can get lost in translation. But rather than argue about the points of view, maybe consider the 6 blind men around the elephant and see how they all fit together. Like a great big collective puzzle solving of unity, not forcing everyone to be the same, rather seeing how our differences work together.